Hi everyone, Blaine here, and today I'm going to do a full flight from San Diego to Los Angeles, and I'm going to go through the entire full flight procedure that I know to show you how to get basically to any airport in X-Plane. Specifically, I'm going to do, like I said, San Diego to Los Angeles, and I'll show you the procedure I go through. So, with that said, let's get started. A couple of things though. I'm not going to be using air traffic control, and I'm not going to be taxiing. Just that's some stuff I'm still working on learning, so I'm not going to be using those. So we're on runway 27 at San Diego, and let's get started. So the first thing we want to do in the aircraft, we're in Zibo's 737-800. Great aircraft. Really appreciate all the work Zibo does. So thank you. So the first thing we're going to do in the flight deck here is we're going to turn up the lights for the screens, just so that they're easier to see. We're going to do this for the lights here, as you can see on the MCP as well as the FMC. We're also going to do it for the overhead panel, just so it's kind of easier to see stuff. Okay, so basically with starting this, we're going to jump into the FMC, or the Flight Management Computer. We're running version 3.22x on Zibo's computer mod, and let's begin. So we're going to select FMC. We're going to go to Position Initial. We're going to enter our reference airport. We're in San Diego, so that's KSAN. And we're going to line select here. We're going to hit route. We're going to enter the runway that we're currently on, we're going to be departing from. We're going to line select runway. We're going to enter our destination, which is KLAX, or Los Angeles, and we're going to line select destination. We're then going to go to Pref Initial, and we're going to enter our cost index, which will be 50. Our reserves, which will be 1. We're going to select this line here. That will give us our altitude, and it's flight level 127, or 12,700. So we're going to hit 127, and then line select over here. We're going to hit execute, and then we're going to go to N1 limit. So the first thing we have to do here is set the temperature. So how you find that is if you kind of drag into your engine screen here, you see 15 degrees Celsius. So that's what we have to input. So, because we're on the other side of the slash here, we have to go /15, and then line select here, and we're good there. We're going to select 22K D rate and climb 1, and go to takeoff, and we're going to set our flaps. Now, flaps for departure for this aircraft are 5, and something you really want to get into the habit of doing is when you enter information into the FMC, you want to make it the same elsewhere in the aircraft. So we've already set the cruise altitude and the flaps. So we're going to go to the MCP, which is the mode control panel here, and we're going to enter in our cruise altitude, which is 12,700. And we're going to set the flaps to 5. That way, we know that that's taken care of, and when we go to departure, we know that we're all set there. So we're going to go back to the FMC, and we're going to select our V-speeds here. Now, 138, as you can see, is going to be the V-speed, so we're going to go to the MCP again. We're going to put that speed in. Back to the FMC. And from here, we're going to go to Departure Arrival. We're going to select Departure because we're in San Diego and we are departing from there. And we're going to select our SID. Now, if you don't know how to select a SID or a star, I urge you to watch my SkyVector and Navigraph video, which will be in the description. That will show you when you're using those two pieces how to get SIDs and stars, and that's really critical if you're going to be using a commercial airliner such as the 737. I've done this flight many times, so because of that, I know what I'm actually going to use. I don't have to look it up. So with that, we're going to use Falc 1 and SXC for the transition. Now, in other instances, the execute light would be available, but it's not here. And if you've run into this before, that's because we have to activate the flight plan. So we would go to route, and we'd hit activate, and then the execute button becomes available, and we're good. Then we're going to go back to departure and arrival, and we're going to go to arrival for KLAX. We're going to select Ocean 3, and we're going to select runway 07 right. So we're going to go previous page, next page, 07 right. And we're going to select John as our transition. And now that we've selected all of that, we're going to hit execute. So, the FMC is more or less programmed. The only thing we have to do now is make changes to our flight plan. So how we do that is we select legs, and then you can see the flight plan is set up here, but we have to make some changes. So on the MCP, we want to switch to plan, and we want to go to 10. And the reason being for that is we're going to want to zoom in on our navigation display here, but also be able to see the FMC. And the reason for that is because we're going to go all along the flight plan and make sure that all of the waypoints connect. Okay? So how you do that is you hit step, and you go along each one to make sure that they're correct. Now when we get to Falk, we can see that there's a long line going off into the distance, and then there's another one coming back, which is kind of weird. We can also see that after a transition here, SXC, there is a route discontinuity. So we have to fix that. So we would hit step, and we can obviously see there's no pink line here. Well, that's because there's a route discontinuity. So we'd follow that along, and we'd go until we can find a waypoint that we can use. So Doyle makes it pretty much so that it's straight. It'll be, if you can follow the mouse here, it'll be like this, you know, straight on, rather than doing this weird kind of, you know, trapezoid-esque, if you will, flight plan. So we're going to line select Doyle. We're going to go to previous page until we get to that discontinuity, and we're going to select it. And then Doyle will take the place of the discontinuity, and it will remove all other waypoints there. And then what we're going to do is hit execute, and as you can see, our flight plan has changed. So after Falk, if we hit step, it connects to SXC. We now have a magenta line, or pink line here, connecting to the rest of the way, or to the flight plan. And as you can see, Doyle and then exert, and then we're going to be heading on. So that's good. Now, one other thing here is if you hit next again, we can see that there's two waypoints really close together. That's not really good, because when the aircraft gets to this point, it's going to have to do a radical turn and then another radical turn in a very short amount of time. So we basically want to get rid of the Murma waypoint. So we would line select John, and then we would select Murma, and we would hit execute. And then you can see the flight plan has changed. So now what we want to do is go back to the previous page all the way to the front here and do this again. So we'd hit step over and over again until we make sure our whole flight plan is correct. And we can see that waypoints are connecting everywhere, and that's perfect all the way to the runway. The next thing we want to do is, this is more of a preference personally, but I find it to be a really good way to do things. So as you can see, when we reach Timsey and John, we're going to be traveling at 250 knots, and then in 5.9 miles, nautical miles, we have to slow down 100 knots. That's really not doable. So I would go ahead and change this speed. Now, in every time that I've flown the 737-800, I've noticed that the final approach speed is around 130. So because of that, I want to start off there. So I'm going to enter in these speeds so the FMC kind of knows to slow down there. So we'll go /135, and we'll line select here. Oh, my bad, sorry, we'll go 135/, I apologize for that. And then it will ask us if we want to execute, and we do. And what I do personally is I go in intervals of 20. So 155/ execute, 175/ execute. Previous page. Here we're going to do, 200/. And then we're kind of set for speeds there, so that's a good thing. Okay, so now the FMC is pretty much programmed. If we go back to our pilot and command view, we're going to switch this back to map, and we're going to switch it back to 40. That's kind of what I like to sit at. The next thing we have to do is prepare the rest of the aircraft. So to be in takeoff position, we want to change the auto brakes to RTO, which is rejected takeoff. And then we want to configure the overhead panel. Now, for what I do in my level of knowledge, I'm not going to be configuring everything. I have the plane set to go in takeoff mode. The engines are started, so I'm not going through the whole startup procedure. I'm only clicking the things that are important for me. So we're going to hit window heat, probes. We're going to select our altitude here, which is 12.5 or 12.7. Now, obviously, we can't hit that because it goes in intervals of 5. So we're going to select 13. Our landing altitude is going to be 150 in Los Angeles, and how we know that is if we go back to the FMC and we go to the legs page and we hit next page, you can see that runway 07 is at an altitude of 182, so the closest one to that would be 150. Back to the overhead panel, and now we're going to turn the engine starts to continuous. We're going to put the landing lights on, and we're going to set the strobe to steady. So that's all done. Now we're going to go to the MCP, which is the mode control panel. We're going to configure that. Pilot in command always wants to have their flight director turned on first. So you would hit flight director for there, and then you would hit the co-pilot flight director. You would then arm the auto throttle, and then you would arm LNAV and VNAV. And that's pretty much done there. Next thing you want to do is you want to go to the radio panels, just to kind of make sure that everything's okay there. This is going to be the ILS frequency we're going to use when we approach LAX. So just as a matter of practice, I'm going to turn that to inactive. Okay? Okay, so we are pretty much ready to go. So what we want to do next is ensure that everything is good to go for takeoff configuration. We have our parameters set in the MCP. We have our flight plan set here. We have the brakes set to rejected takeoff. Flaps are at 5. Pretty much good to go here. So the next thing we need to do is we need to throttle right here to 40%. And it doesn't have to be exactly 40.0. You want to get close to that. You know, if it's 40.8 or whatever, that's totally fine. So, okay. Next thing we want to do is we want to hit flight path vector. And then the last thing we do before we actually take off, this is very important, you want to hit TOGA, or takeoff go around. This is very important. This makes it so that the aircraft knows that they can circumvent speeds. So there's two ways to do that. You can either have it programmed to a certain key, which is what I have, or you can select this button right here, and that will actually do the same thing. So as soon as you release the parking brake, you want to make sure that you hit this button, okay? So with that in mind, let's go. Let's get in the wind. So park brake disabled, and then TOGA activate. You don't need to touch your throttle. All you need to do now is just wait until you get to 138 knots, and the aircraft will tell you that they're going to, it's V1, at which case you'll rotate the aircraft. Rotate aircraft. And we want to follow the flight director and kind of follow this little magenta star. Positive rate, gear up. We're at 1,000 feet. We're going to level down so we can increase our speed. We're going to turn flaps up, and we're going to activate autopilot. In terms of activating autopilot, you can do it as of 400 feet. I'm still learning really how to follow the flight director, well and things like that. The flight director being this part right here, and this kind of star is exactly where the aircraft wants to be. I'm still working on that. But as of 1,000 feet, that's kind of the good time to really turn on autopilot if you so choose, because you want the aircraft to increase the speed by nosing down, and that. When I mentioned positive rate, this little part of the PFD right here, when that is above the altitude here, that is a positive rate, and when it's below, it's a negative rate. Positive rate means you are climbing at a positive rate, obviously, and that's when you would do gear up. Now, if you haven't already, you want to put your throttle to idle, which is all the way back. Now you can see the speed of the aircraft is approaching 250, but it's not really climbing, that fast. That's okay. Below 10,000 feet, it will hold at 250 knots, and that's normal. The only other thing we really need to do here is our gear is up, but not a bad idea to put it into locked, so I'm going to set the gear to locked. Now, you can see for this particular situation, the aircraft is basically leveling off at 3,900 feet. And that right there is because we have an altitude restriction. So if we go to the FMC and we select legs, we can see 4,000 B. So that's 4,000 feet at or below. And once we clear this altitude restriction, we have to basically circumvent the MCP and say, you know what, we're no longer at the altitude restriction, we want to climb past that. Sometimes it will work on its own, sometimes it won't, and I'll show you what to do for that. So we have 2.9 nautical miles until we clear the altitude restriction, and then we can get that going. You don't have to jump to the FMC to always know kind of where you are. You can see right here that that next waypoint where the altitude restriction ends is approaching, and it's 0.7 nautical miles right here on the nav display. So that's kind of so you can always know where you are. And we've officially crossed the altitude restriction. We no longer have it in place. So because the FMC won't always recognize that, we're going to have to physically circumvent the altitude restriction. So how you do that is on the MCP or mode control panel, which is the center thing here, you'll see below VNAV it will say level change. You want to select that. And that basically tells the autopilot to say we no longer need to be holding at the VNAV altitude. We can go ahead and climb to our cruise altitude, which is set right here, which is 12,700. And as you can see, we have a positive rate, and we're climbing now. We're below 10,000 feet, so the aircraft is still going to hold at around 250 knots because it's required to, and that's okay. It's not going to take us long to get to 10,000 though. And as you can see, we're about to approach 10,000. At 10,000 feet, the aircraft will increase its speed because it no longer needs to hold at 250. What we need to do at 10,000 feet is a couple of things in the overhead panel. So the first thing we need to do is we need to turn the engine starts to auto, and we need to turn the landing lights off. Once we get to about 11,800 or so, we're going to reactivate VNAV so that the aircraft knows to basically fly at 12,700 feet. Now that buzz that we just heard was basically the aircraft notifying us that we are approaching our cruise altitude. And we're going to select VNAV once again. Now you can see that the aircraft is slowly climbing to 12,700. The rate is going to level off, and we're increasing our speed. The reason why we're doing that is if we go to the FMC, we can see that the speed that we're supposed to be at is 303 knots. So the aircraft is basically accelerating to reach that speed. So we're about to reach Falk, which is going to be our SID, and that's going to turn the aircraft west, which is normal because we have to actually go out a little bit onto the ocean in order for us to be able to come in for Los Angeles correctly. Now, I just heard a beep, which was the FMC, and oh, no, we're all good then. Okay, so we're going to head now to our transition, which is 44 nautical miles away, which is fine. The only other thing we have to do now is basically monitor for when we approach top of descent. Now, I have it set relatively low for our distance here. If we increase that, you can see here this little line that says T/D. That's top of descent. Top of descent, just before that, we actually have to make some changes to the aircraft to prepare it for descent. The things we'll have to do then will make it so that the aircraft knows to descend correctly and at what altitude and so forth. We don't have to do that until just before top of descent. If you were to change that, the settings, which I will explain thoroughly, it kind of affects the fuel load and performance of the aircraft, so we want to wait a bit. But we're not going to have to worry about that until probably, you know, a couple of minutes after we approach the St. Catalina Island right now. So with that in mind, I'm basically going to switch it back to 20, and we're cruising, everything's fine. So for the next little bit, guys, we just get to chill and kind of enjoy the flight. So I'm going to take some external shots, and I'll see you back here shortly. Hey everyone, and we're back. So as you can see, we're approaching top of descent, so there's some changes we have to make. First thing we have to do is set the FMC altitude. So you would go to legs and go to next page, and you would look for just before the runway, and you'd look for this altitude, and that's what you would set in the FMC. So we want to change that to 1800. We then go back to the FMC, and we go to init ref. We want to select our flap speed, so we would line select here. And we have to set this information, so we have to set the course to 69 and the ILS radios to this frequency. So we're first going to go to the MCP, and we're going to set the course. And we're also going to set the auto brakes to 2. And then we're going to set the FMC frequencies. Now, I do this flight often, so that's why they're already in there, and then you would basically turn these to auto, or to active I should say. And we've done this all before top of descent, which is when we need to do it, just before. So, with that in mind, we are beginning to slow down, which is totally normal, that's what we want to see. We're approaching Doyle, which is going to be one of our last kind of waypoints before we actually turn base, and then begin our descent. Now, as you remember at the start of this video, I entered in FMC speeds to let the aircraft kind of know that it needs to slow down. However, not always will the FMC be intuitive enough to know that it has to slow down to that speed. And also, if you can think about it, if you think about a plane, not an aircraft, like a plane, like an inclined plane, you know, down obviously increasing speed, up increasing speed, because the plane is going to descend, it's going to naturally increase speed. And so because of that, oftentimes we have to assist the plane in slowing down. Now, we're at top of descent, so we are beginning to descend, which is exactly normal. But if we go to the FMC real quick, and we go to legs, we can see that by Doyle, we should be doing 250 knots. And we're going to be there in 6.8 nautical miles. So, right now we're at 273, and we're not really, the speed's not really moving. So what I generally do in this situation to assist the aircraft in slowing down is I deploy the speed brake. And then that will assist the plane in slowing down. Now remember, we want to be at 250 knots. We don't want to be below that. So, as it gets to about 250, I'm going to turn the speed brake off. Because the aircraft wants to hold that around that speed until we get to the next waypoint. Now, once we cross over to Doyle, we're going to decel again, as you can see here on the nav display. And then when we get to exert, we're going to turn base. So, by exert, if we go back to the FMC, we should be at 200. We have 10 nautical miles to kind of get there. So with this one here, you can see that we're at 244. I'm not going to do anything right now. When I get to about 4 nautical miles, I'm going to deploy the speed brake again. Now you just heard a beep. If I go to the FMC, it's going to tell me that drag is required. That usually comes up, and so basically we have to slow the aircraft more. I had said, you know, when I get to about 4, I'm going to extend the speed brake, so I'm going to do that now. and that's going to slow the aircraft down as well. Now the aircraft is beginning to turn base, which means that it's beginning to turn on its kind of final major turn before it reaches the approach for the airport, and you can see our speed is now increasing. So in this instance, I'm going to deploy flaps 1. Flaps you have to be very conservative with when you're deploying it, because while it would be very nice for you to simply be able to deploy flaps and slow right down and come in at your own leisurely pace, you have traffic behind you, and so because of that, you can't simply just deploy flaps as you want. You have to be very conservative with it. In this instance, though, I will not slow down unless I deploy flaps 1, and so that's why I'm doing that. And as you can see now, our speed is radically decreasing. So because of that, I'm going to retract the speed brake 1. And then the speed is going to slow down just a little bit. We're going to go back to the FMC. So we should be at 175 right away. So yeah, we need to slow down now. So I'm going to redeploy the speed brake. And as you can see, we're slowing down. When we get a little bit closer to the airport, we're going to configure for approach. Now, although we have the ILS frequencies programmed in, I find that you need to set the approach, and so I let X-Plane help me with that when I'm doing it. If we go to our map right now, we're going to be able to see that we've turned base to the airport here, and that these are the ILS frequencies. Now we're going to do 07 right, and we've already hit it, but it's already entered it into the aircraft, but always a good idea just to hit tune nav 1 just to make sure. Right here is where we would select the approach for the runways, and as you can see, 07 right has not become available to us yet, and that's okay. Because we are approaching the aircraft now, we are slowing down, that's good. We're going to hit flaps 5. The next thing we're going to do, as you can see here, this diamond right here shows that we are on point for the glide slope. So for that, on the MCP, I'm going to hit VOR lock, and then the diamond is going to drop, and then I'm going to hit approach. I'm also going to change the distance here to 10, so we kind of know where we are in terms of our speed and our distance and things like that. So we're currently at 179, and the FMC says we should be at 135 rather quickly. So I'm going to deploy flaps again. I'm going to make sure the speed brake is extended, and it is. So now we're just kind of slowing down until we get to the aircraft. As you can see, I've deployed to flaps 5, and now we're slowing down again. If I hit map, I can see that we're getting closer to the airport, and so if I hit approach, runway 07 right has become available, and I'm going to select that, and we are in the glide slope there, so that is good, which means we're more than likely going to capture the glide slope shortly. If I go back to the FMC and I hit the legs page, I can see that we are 5 nautical, we're about 8 nautical miles away from the aircraft. When we get inside 5 is when we want to deploy the gear. So we're at 159 here. We're going to do flaps again. I'm going to retract the speed brake 1. The MCP speed here I'm going to change. We're going to slow that down automatically to 150. I'm going to hit flaps down again. If I go back to my map, I can see that we have captured the glide slope and we are bringing in, so that is really good. Now we just have to control our flaps and control our speed. We're coming in. If I zoom in here, I can see these set of lights here. These are known as your PAPL lights. 2 white and 2 red means that you are even with the glide slope and you are coming in exactly at the profile you're supposed to, which is 700 feet for the descent. So that is good. Right now it says it's 800, but that's okay. 700 is usually what it's at. So all we have to do now is basically deploy flaps as we need to slow the aircraft down more, and we're coming in. We're inside 5, so I'm going to put gear down. And gear is currently in transition. And we're going to slow down now, so I'm going to bring it down to 135. And you can see here that gear is locked. Slowing down again, so that's good. I'm going to make sure the speed brake is fully retracted and armed. I'm going to hit flaps again. Checking the PAPL lights again, and we have 2 and 2, so we're good. I'm going to configure the terrain button to be on. We're at 135, so we're good. We're going to do flaps 40. And so other than this, we are good. We're coming in, glide slope is captured, and now we're just descending. So just before the runway, I will go ahead and take control of the aircraft, and then we're good. If we go back to the FMC, and we go to init ref, we can see that we're supposed to be at 130, which is fine. I'm going to dial this back just a little bit more. Coming in, PAPL lights are still even, so that's good. We are absolutely on course for approach. Now, because I'm not using air traffic controller taxiing, I'm just going to kind of do my own manual taxiing to get off the runway. And I'm going to take control of the aircraft now. Coming down, we want to do a 5-degree flare. And we're down. We're going to nose down. Auto throttle has turned off. We're going to activate reversers. Deploy the speed brake, manually brake. Reversers aren't activating, my apologies for that. I'm just going to manually brake then. Now they're activating naturally when it's below 80, which it shouldn't be. I'll wait till we get to about 60 and then I'll turn them off. Reversers deactivated, manual braking. And I'll exit off on this taxiway here onto Alpha. When you're taxiing, you want to make sure that you try and follow the lead-in lines, because that's the whole point of knowing where the aircraft is supposed to go. Obviously, I'm not taxiing to a specific gate here, but I want to follow them as a measure of good practice. Throttle is set to idle. And then I'm going to manually brake the last part here and activate the parking brake. So, as you can see, we've landed in LAX. If I go to the external side of the aircraft here, we've landed, everything is good, and it was a great flight. So I hope that this video helps you out. I'm going to do more full flights as the days go on, and hopefully this instruction helps you. Until next time.